One choice. One moment. One love story. Welcome to When He Chose Her. Enjoy the story. You're about to hear the moment a billionaire lost an argument to a waitress over a number written on a napkin and gained something he never expected. The rain tapped softly against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Sterling Room, one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants, where a single dinner reservation often required a 3-month wait. Crystal chandeliers scattered warm light across polished marble floors. Expensive watches flashed beneath tailored suit sleeves. Conversations drifted through the air in low, confident tones. It was a room filled with people accustomed to being right. At the center of it sat Grayson Whitmore, 38 years old, billionaire, founder of Whitmore Capital. Financial magazines called him a genius. Business channels called him visionary. His competitors called him dangerous. Tonight, he sat surrounded by investors and executives, casually discussing a new acquisition expected to generate hundreds of millions in profit over the next 5 years. Grayson leaned back in his chair and reached for a linen napkin. With a fountain pen, he scribbled several figures and formulas while speaking. Around the table, heads nodded. No one questioned him. No one ever did. Based on the projected growth rate, we're looking at a net gain of approximately $212 million by year 3, he said confidently, tapping the final number. The executives exchanged impressed looks. One investor laughed. That's why you're the billionaire, and we're not. The group chuckled. Grayson smiled politely. He had heard variations of that sentence his entire adult life. Just then, a quiet voice appeared beside the table. Excuse me, sir. Nobody paid attention at first. Waitresses were practically invisible in rooms like this. Grayson glanced up. Standing beside him was a young woman carrying a silver coffee pot. Her name tag read Evelyn Harper. Blonde hair neatly tied back. Simple black uniform. Calm blue eyes. Nothing about her appearance suggested she belonged in a conversation about corporate acquisitions worth billions of dollars. Your coffee, sir, she said softly. Grayson slid his cup forward without looking at her. Thank you. She poured carefully. Then her eyes drifted toward the napkin. For a brief second, her expression changed. Not surprise. Not confusion. Concern. Is something wrong? Grayson asked, noticing the look. Evelyn hesitated. Every instinct told her to stay quiet. Customers did not like being corrected. Billionaires liked it even less. Yet the numbers sat there in plain sight. Sir, she said carefully, I think there may be a mistake. The conversation stopped. Forks froze. Several heads turned toward her. Grayson blinked. A mistake. In the calculation. A few people exchanged amused smiles. One executive nearly laughed into his water glass. Grayson stared at her for a moment, unsure whether he had heard correctly. You're referring to my calculation? Yes, sir. Her voice remained calm. I believe the growth percentage was applied twice during the third-year projection. Silence lingered for a heartbeat. Then someone at the table chuckled. Another joined in. Within seconds, half the group was smiling. One investor leaned back. This I have to hear. Grayson folded his arms. Surprisingly, he wasn't angry. He was intrigued. And how much do you think I'm off by? Evelyn glanced at the napkin again. Roughly $32 million. This time the laughter grew louder. $32 million. The number sounded absurd. Grayson raised an eyebrow. That's very specific. Math usually is. The answer arrived so quietly that it took a second for everyone to process it. Then a few people laughed even harder. One executive wiped tears from his eyes. I like her. Grayson slid the napkin across the table toward his chief financial officer. Humor me. The CFO adjusted his glasses. He examined the figures. Still smiling, he began running through the calculations on his tablet. The room buzzed with amusement. Someone ordered another round of drinks. Evelyn simply stood beside the table holding the coffee pot. Calm, patient, almost detached. 30 seconds passed. Then 60. The CFO's smile slowly faded. His fingers moved faster across the screen. A second executive leaned over to look. Another followed. The laughter disappeared one person at a time. Grayson noticed the shift immediately. What is it? He asked. No answer. The CFO checked the numbers again. Then a third time. Finally, he looked up. She's right. The words landed with surprising weight. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The restaurant seemed to shrink around the table. What? Grayson asked. The growth multiplier was applied twice. The CFO swallowed. The projection is overstated by approximately $31.8 million. Complete silence. Across the room, glasses clinked and conversations continued, unaware that an entire table of financial experts had just been corrected by a waitress carrying a coffee pot. Grayson stared at Evelyn. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply nodded once. "I'm sorry for interrupting, sir," she said. "I just thought you'd want to know." Then she turned and walked away. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Grayson's eyes followed her as she disappeared into the crowd of diners. Somewhere deep beneath the embarrassment, beneath the surprise, beneath the wounded pride, another feeling emerged. Curiosity. Because for the first time in years, someone had challenged him. And somehow, the quietest person in the room had become the one nobody could stop thinking about. The silence around Grayson Whitmore's table lasted only a few seconds, but it followed him all the way home. The city lights stretched beneath the windows of his penthouse 70 stories above Manhattan. Yellow taxis crawled through the streets like tiny sparks. Normally, views like this reminded him how far he had come. Tonight, all he could see was a waitress holding a coffee pot and casually correcting a $32 million mistake. Grayson loosened his tie and walked toward the floor-to-ceiling glass. His phone buzzed with messages from investors congratulating him on the meeting. He ignored every one of them. Instead, he opened the photo he had taken of the napkin before leaving the restaurant. The numbers stared back at him. He checked them again. Then again. The answer never changed. Evelyn Harper had been right. The next morning, the story had somehow spread through his executive team. By 10 o'clock, people were smiling when he entered conference rooms. By noon, they were making jokes. "Should we have Evelyn review the quarterly reports?" one vice president asked. A few people laughed. Grayson gave him a look. Unfortunately, that only made everyone laugh harder. For years, he had been the smartest person in every room. Now he was apparently the billionaire who got corrected by a waitress. At 3 o'clock that afternoon, his chief financial officer walked into his office carrying a folder. "You are not going to like this." Grayson looked up. That is usually how these conversations start. The CFO sat down. "I recreated the calculation from yesterday. And she was not just right." He slid the papers across the desk. "She spotted the error in less than 5 seconds." Grayson frowned. So most of our analysts would need several minutes to notice it." The room grew quiet. That was not luck, Grayson. For the first time, the possibility settled heavily into the air. Maybe Evelyn Harper actually knew what she was doing. Maybe far more than anyone realized. 2 days later, Grayson returned to the Sterling room. Not because he was hungry. Not because he had a meeting. He arrived because curiosity had become impossible to ignore. The restaurant buzzed with its usual elegance. Crystal glasses reflected warm light. Soft piano music drifted through the dining room. Grayson immediately spotted Evelyn. She was carrying a tray toward another table. Calm. Focused. Completely unaware that one of the richest men in New York had spent 48 hours thinking about her. She approached his table a few minutes later. "Good evening, Mr. Whitmore." Her voice remained professional. "Welcome back. You remembered my name." Most people remember the man whose face appears on magazine covers. A faint smile appeared on her lips. Grayson found himself smiling back. "Fair point." She handed him a menu. "Would you like your usual coffee?" "You remember that too?" "I remember customers. Or math mistakes." Her eyes sparkled slightly. "Only the expensive ones." For a moment, Grayson actually laughed. A genuine laugh. Not the polite corporate version he used during interviews. Evelyn seemed surprised by it. So was he. As she turned to leave, Grayson stopped her. "I have a question." She paused. "Yes." "How did you see it so quickly?" Evelyn looked toward the napkin he had purposely placed beside his plate. She recognized it immediately. The error. Yes. She studied the numbers for less than a second. Patterns. Patterns. Numbers have habits. Most people read them one line at a time. I look for inconsistencies first. Grayson stared at her. "You make that sound simple." "It is simple." She picked up the pen resting beside the napkin. Then she wrote 3 new numbers beneath his original calculation. "This one is wrong too." Grayson blinked. "What?" She slid the napkin back toward him. "The tax adjustment should be 6.4%, not 6.7. His eyes widened. He grabbed his phone and opened the spreadsheet. 20 seconds later he froze. She was right again. Across the room, a nearby customer noticed his expression. Everything okay over there? Grayson looked up slowly. Then he looked at Evelyn. She simply stood there waiting for his coffee order, as though correcting million-dollar calculations was the most normal thing in the world. For the second time in a week, Grayson Whitmore found himself speechless. And for the second time, Evelyn Harper calmly walked away before anyone could ask the question that was beginning to haunt him. Who exactly was this waitress? The question followed Grayson Whitmore everywhere. During meetings, during interviews, even during his morning workout overlooking the Hudson River. Who was Evelyn Harper? 3 days after their second encounter, curiosity finally overcame pride. Grayson returned to the Sterling Room for the third time that week. Even the hostess looked surprised. Billionaires rarely became regular customers, especially not billionaires who supposedly had no free time. The dinner crowd had already begun filling the restaurant. Soft jazz floated through the room. Candles flickered against crystal glassware. Across the dining room, Evelyn balanced 3 plates effortlessly as she navigated between tables. Calm as always. Focused as always. Grayson watched her for a moment before shaking his head. This was becoming ridiculous. He built companies worth billions of dollars. Yet somehow a waitress had become the most puzzling problem he had encountered all year. When Evelyn approached his table, she greeted him with the same professional smile. "Good evening, Mr. Whitmore." "Evelyn." She tilted her head slightly. "That sounds unusually serious." "I have a proposition." "That sounds unusually dangerous." The answer arrived so quickly that Grayson almost laughed. Almost. Evelyn placed a glass of water on the table. "Should I be concerned?" "Only if you dislike money." "Everyone likes money." "Good." Grayson reached into his jacket pocket and removed a folded document. "I have a challenge for you." Evelyn stared at the paper without touching it. "Most people offer dessert first. Most people are not me." "That is true." He slid the document across the table. "Inside is a valuation model for a company we are considering acquiring." Evelyn remained still. "And if you find a mistake, I will pay you $100,000. For the first time, genuine surprise appeared on her face. A businessman seated at the neighboring table nearly choked on his drink after overhearing the number. $100,000 was not the kind of tip people discussed over dinner. Evelyn glanced at the folder, then back at Grayson. "What happens if I do not find a mistake?" "Then you admit you got lucky." Her expression changed instantly. Not angry, not offended, just amused. "That is the challenge." "Yes." "You believe I have been guessing." Grayson leaned back. "I believe statistical probability favors coincidence more than miracles." Evelyn folded her arms. "Interesting." "What?" "You are the first billionaire I have met who turns curiosity into a competitive sport." The businessman at the neighboring table laughed openly this time. Grayson ignored him. "Do we have a deal?" Evelyn looked down at the folder once more. Then she surprised him. She pushed it back across the table. "No." Grayson blinked. "No. I am working. You can review it later." Still no. "Why?" Evelyn smiled slightly. "Because if I solve it, you will think money motivated me. And if you do not, then you will think you were right." Grayson opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nothing came out. Evelyn nodded toward the menu. "Now would you like dinner or another math problem?" The businessman beside them laughed so hard he nearly spilled his coffee. Grayson found himself laughing too. For perhaps the first time in years, someone was not impressed by his wealth, not intimidated by his reputation, not interested in gaining anything from him. It was strangely refreshing. As Evelyn turned to leave, she paused. "Bring the folder tomorrow." Grayson looked up. "Tomorrow? My shift ends at 6. You changed your mind?" She smiled over her shoulder. "No. I simply realized something." "What?" "I would very much enjoy proving you wrong." Then she disappeared into the crowd. Grayson stared after her. Across the room, city lights shimmered through the windows like scattered stars. For the first time since building his empire, he found himself looking forward to losing a bet. The next afternoon, a cold spring rain drifted across Manhattan as Evelyn Harper stepped through the revolving doors of Whitmore Capital. The building rose more than 60 stories above the avenue, its glass exterior reflecting the gray sky like a polished mirror. People in tailored suits moved quickly through the marble lobby carrying laptops, coffee cups, and conversations about markets worth billions. For a brief moment, Evelyn stood quietly near the entrance. Her black coat was simple, her shoes practical. She looked completely out of place among the executives rushing past. Yet unlike everyone else, She did not seem impressed by the building. She simply looked up once, nodded to herself, and walked toward the reception desk. 20 floors above, Grayson Whitmore stood inside the executive conference room, watching through a glass wall. Several members of his leadership team had gathered out of curiosity. Word had spread quickly. The mysterious waitress was actually coming. One analyst whispered, "This is either going to be fascinating or incredibly awkward." Another smiled. "My money is on awkward." Grayson folded his arms. "Then it is fortunate nobody asked you to invest." A few quiet laughs followed. Moments later, the conference room door opened. Evelyn entered carrying the folder. Her expression remained calm. The room immediately grew quieter. Grayson gestured toward a chair. "Thank you for coming. You offered $100,000. That motivated you?" "No." She placed the folder on the table. "Proving you wrong motivated me." Several executives exchanged amused looks. Grayson found himself smiling despite every effort not to. "Fair enough." Evelyn opened the folder and slid several pages across the table. "Your model works." One analyst leaned back proudly. "I knew it." Evelyn continued. "Mostly." The pride disappeared instantly. Grayson raised an eyebrow. "Mostly." She nodded. "There are 3 errors." A few executives shifted uncomfortably. "3?" asked the chief financial officer. "Yes." Evelyn pointed to the first page. "This assumption regarding customer retention rates is unrealistic." "Why?" someone asked. "Because the data comes from a pandemic year." Silence. The executive responsible for the projection blinked twice. "That is actually true." Evelyn moved to the second page. "This expansion forecast assumes identical performance across all regions." "That is standard modeling." "It is also wrong." She pointed towards several columns. "Consumer behavior in Arizona does not mirror consumer behavior in New York." The room became even quieter. Grayson watched his team carefully. Nobody was laughing anymore. Then Evelyn reached the final page. Her finger stopped beside a series of calculations. "This one is the expensive mistake." The chief financial officer leaned forward. "How expensive?" "Approximately $412 million. Several people stared at her. One executive nearly dropped his pen. Grayson felt the room shift around him. "Explain." Evelyn calmly turned the page. "The acquisition model assumes long-term debt will remain fixed." "Correct. Except it will not." She pointed toward a small footnote buried deep inside the financial disclosures. "Variable adjustment clause." The chief financial officer grabbed the report. His eyes widened, then widened further. "Oh no." Nobody spoke. The silence stretched across the conference room. "What?" Grayson asked. The CFO looked up slowly. "She found it." "Found what?" "A debt adjustment provision." He swallowed. "If interest rates move even slightly, our projected profit drops by more than $400 million. The room froze. Every executive suddenly looked at Evelyn differently. Not as a waitress, not as an amusing curiosity, but as someone who had spotted a problem their entire team had missed. Grayson stared at her for several seconds. "How long did this take you?" Evelyn glanced toward the folder. "About 45 minutes. Nobody laughed this time. Nobody even smiled. Outside the conference room windows, Manhattan continued moving beneath the clouds. Taxis crossed intersections. Ferries moved across the river. Life carried on. Inside the room, however, something had changed. For the first time, Grayson Whitmore realized the woman sitting across from him was not simply good at math. She was operating on a completely different level. And the most astonishing part was that she did not seem aware of how extraordinary she truly was. That night, Grayson could not sleep. 300 analysts worked across Whitmore Capital. Yet a waitress had spotted what all of them had missed. He replayed the meeting again and again in his mind. The numbers bothered him less than the woman behind them. Something about Evelyn Harper refused to fit into any category he understood. The meeting ended with stunned executives and a folder full of corrected numbers. But Grayson Whitmore left with something far more valuable. Questions. Too many questions. 3 days passed. Then 4. Every background report his private research team delivered created more confusion instead of answers. Evelyn Harper appeared remarkably ordinary on paper. No advanced degrees. No prestigious financial career. No history at elite consulting firms. No published research. No patents. No awards. Nothing that explained how a restaurant waitress could outperform analysts earning 6-figure salaries. One Friday morning, Grayson sat behind his desk staring at another report. His chief of staff entered carrying coffee. "Still reading about her?" she asked. Grayson looked up. "That obvious? You have reviewed the same file 4 times. The file makes no sense." "Maybe that is because people are more complicated than spreadsheets." Grayson leaned back in his chair. "I dislike mysteries. That explains why you keep chasing this one." Later that afternoon, curiosity finally won. Not because he intended to investigate Evelyn. At least that was what he told himself. He simply wanted answers. The report mentioned that every Friday evening she volunteered somewhere in Brooklyn. No additional details. Around 6 o'clock, Grayson found himself standing outside a small neighborhood library several miles from Manhattan's financial district. The building was old but well-maintained. Children laughed inside. Bright drawings decorated the windows. Nothing about it seemed connected to billion-dollar financial models. Grayson entered quietly. Through a doorway near the back, he spotted Evelyn. She stood beside a whiteboard surrounded by a dozen middle school students. She was not carrying a coffee pot. She was not wearing a uniform. Yet somehow she looked exactly the same. Calm, focused, comfortable. A boy raised his hand. "Miss Harper, I still do not get fractions." Evelyn smiled. "That is because nobody explained them correctly." She grabbed a pizza illustration from the board. "Imagine your brother promises to share." The children immediately laughed. "That is already unrealistic," one girl said. Evelyn laughed with them. "Excellent observation. Let us assume for one miraculous moment that your brother becomes generous." The room filled with giggles. Even Grayson smiled. For the next hour, he watched from the back as Evelyn transformed complicated math concepts into simple stories. Fractions became pizzas. Percentages became baseball statistics. Probability became card games. Every child remained engaged. Every child understood. There was no arrogance in her intelligence. No need to impress anyone. She simply enjoyed helping others learn. Grayson found that strangely beautiful. Then things became awkward. A librarian suddenly approached him. "Sir." Grayson turned. "Yes. Can I help you?" "I am just observing." "Observing what?" "The class." The librarian narrowed her eyes. "Do you have a child here?" "No." "Are you a volunteer?" "No." "Then why are you standing behind the bookshelf watching?" Grayson opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Unfortunately, billion-dollar negotiations had never prepared him for this conversation. "That is actually a very good question," he admitted. The librarian folded her arms. "Sir, I am going to need a better answer than that." Across the room, Evelyn glanced over and immediately recognized him. Her eyes widened. Then she laughed. Not politely, not discreetly, genuinely laughed. "Mr. Whitmore?" Every student turned toward him. One boy pointed excitedly. "Is that your boyfriend?" The entire room exploded with laughter. Grayson nearly dropped his composure. Evelyn covered her face, trying unsuccessfully to stop laughing herself. "No," she said. "He is definitely not my boyfriend." The boy nodded thoughtfully. "You seem disappointed." More laughter followed. For perhaps the first time in years, Grayson felt completely out of his element. Yet as he watched Evelyn smiling among the children, surrounded by joy she had created herself, he realized something important. The smartest thing about Evelyn Harper was not her ability to find mistakes in numbers. It was her ability to make other people feel capable of succeeding. And somehow, that discovery fascinated him even more than the math ever had. The following Monday began with optimism inside Whitmore Capital. Sunlight poured across conference tables. Analysts moved confidently through presentations. Executives discussed what many were calling the opportunity of the decade. The target was a rapidly growing technology company called Nexus Dynamics. Revenues were soaring. Investors were excited. Market forecasts looked spectacular. Every major consulting firm involved in the evaluation recommended immediate acquisition. By noon, nearly everyone inside the company had reached the same conclusion. Buy it. Grayson Whitmore sat at the head of the boardroom table listening. Carefully, charts flashed across giant screens. Growth projections climbed higher with every presentation. The numbers appeared almost perfect. Yet something felt wrong. Not in the reports. Not in the financial statements. In himself. For the first time in years, he found himself wondering what Evelyn Harper would say. That realization irritated him more than he wanted to admit. After all, he had an entire floor filled with experts. Yet by late afternoon, He was standing outside the Sterling room carrying a confidential summary of the acquisition. Evelyn arrived at his table with her usual calm smile. "You look troubled. I am considering a major acquisition." "That explains the face." "What face?" "The one that says you have not trusted anyone all day." Grayson laughed softly despite himself. "Everyone says it is a great deal. And I was hoping you would look at it." Evelyn studied him for a moment. Then she sat across from him after receiving permission from her manager. The restaurant was still quiet before the dinner rush. Sunlight filtered through the windows. The city moved beyond the glass. For several minutes, she reviewed the summary in silence. Her eyes moved steadily across the pages. Occasionally, she circled something with a pen. Occasionally, she frowned. Finally, she placed the documents on the table. "Do not buy it." Grayson stared at her. That was fast. The answer was fast. Every consultant involved recommends it. Then they are looking at the wrong numbers. Grayson leaned forward. "Explain." Evelyn tapped one section. "Customer growth." "What about it?" "It is real." She tapped another section. "Revenue growth." "Also real." Then she pointed toward a much smaller figure buried deep inside the report. "This is not." Grayson frowned. "Employee retention?" "Exactly. Why does that matter?" Evelyn folded her hands. "Because healthy companies do not lose their best employees this quickly." Grayson studied the page. The turnover rate was unusually high. Maybe they are expanding too quickly. Maybe. Or, Evelyn looked directly at him. Or the people closest to the company know something investors do not. Silence settled between them. "That is a serious accusation." No, her voice remained calm. "It is a serious possibility." Later that week, Whitmore Capital's board gathered for the final vote. Every advisor recommended approval. Every projection supported approval. Every executive except one favored moving forward immediately. Grayson sat quietly listening to arguments from both sides. Finally, someone asked the question, "Why are we still hesitating?" The room turned toward him. Grayson glanced through the windows overlooking Manhattan. Then he thought about a library in Brooklyn, a classroom full of children, a waitress who never seemed impressed by money, a woman who had already saved his company hundreds of millions of dollars. Because one person disagrees. Several executives exchanged confused looks. One person. Grayson nodded. "And lately, she has been right more often than the rest of us combined." The room fell silent. For the first time in his career, Grayson Whitmore ignored the consensus of experts and trusted the judgment of a waitress. Neither of them knew it yet, but that decision was about to change everything. The waiting was harder than the decision itself. Those 10 days felt longer than 10 months. Every market update made the board more nervous. Every new report seemed to support the acquisition. Yet Grayson found himself holding on to a single uncomfortable possibility. What if Evelyn was seeing something the rest of Wall Street could not? 10 days after the board meeting, the headlines arrived just after sunrise. Financial news networks interrupted their regular programming. Market analysts scrambled to update reports. Investors flooded social media with reactions. Nexus Dynamics, the company everyone had been rushing to acquire, was suddenly under investigation for major accounting irregularities. Hidden liabilities began appearing one after another. Revenue forecasts were revised downward. Several senior executives resigned within days. By noon, the company's stock had lost nearly half its value. Inside Whitmore Capital, television screens glowed across every floor. Employees gathered around conference rooms and break areas watching the story unfold. The same executives who had argued passionately for the acquisition now stared at the news in disbelief. Grayson Whitmore stood quietly in his office overlooking Manhattan. His phone would not stop ringing. Investors congratulated him. Board members praised his restraint. Reporters requested interviews. One message after another carried the same theme. "You saved the company." Yet Grayson knew the truth. He had not saved anything. Someone else had. Later that evening, the Sterling room was unusually busy. Rain tapped gently against the windows while guests filled nearly every table. Evelyn Harper moved through the dining room carrying trays and refilling glasses, completely unaware that her prediction had become the biggest business story in New York. When she finally approached Grayson's table, she noticed the unusual expression on his face. "You look relieved." "I am." "Good news." Grayson slid his phone across the table. A financial article filled the screen. Evelyn read silently for a few seconds. Then she handed the phone back. I see. That is your reaction? What reaction were you expecting? Grayson laughed softly. Most people would be celebrating. Most people were not almost $400 million wrong. He shook his head. You realize you saved my company from a disaster. Your company saved itself. No, his voice was firm. You did. For a brief moment, neither spoke. Around them, conversations blended into a gentle background hum. Glasses clinked softly. Piano music drifted through the restaurant. Finally, Evelyn looked away. She seemed almost uncomfortable with praise. You are welcome, she said quietly. Something about that simple answer stayed with Grayson. No arrogance. No demand for recognition. No expectation of reward. Just quiet honesty. After her shift ended that night, Grayson waited near the entrance. When Evelyn emerged wearing her coat, she looked surprised to find him standing there. Did you forget something? She asked. Yes. What? To say thank you properly. Evelyn smiled. You already did. Not adequately. She laughed. That sounds like something a billionaire would say. Probably. For a moment, they stood beneath the glow of the streetlights as rain shimmered across the pavement. The city seemed softer than usual. Less hurried. Less loud. Come have dinner with me, Grayson said. Evelyn blinked. We are standing outside a restaurant. A different dinner. Why? Grayson considered the question carefully. The old version of himself would have offered a business reason. A financial reason. Something logical. Instead, he told the truth. Because every conversation with you is more interesting than every meeting I attended this week. Evelyn looked genuinely surprised. Then she smiled. Not the professional smile she gave customers. A real one. Warm and unguarded. That may be the strangest compliment I have ever received. Was that a yes? She pretended to think about it. Maybe. Maybe. I enjoy keeping billionaires uncertain. Grayson laughed. You are very good at it. Together, they began walking toward the corner. No reporters. No executives. No investors. Just two people moving through the rainy streets of Manhattan. For the first time since they met, neither talked about numbers. Neither discussed business. And somewhere between the glowing storefronts and reflections dancing across the wet pavement, something quietly began to change. The billionaire who once saw people as calculations was learning to enjoy moments that could not be measured at all. One dinner became two. Two became weekly conversations. Coffee turned into walks through the city. Walks became traditions neither of them planned. Spring quietly gave way to summer. Somewhere along the way, they stopped being a billionaire and a waitress. They simply became Grayson and Evelyn. Spring gradually gave way to early summer, and somewhere along the way, dinner conversations became a regular part of Grayson Whitmore's week. Sometimes they met at small cafes tucked between brownstones in Brooklyn. Sometimes they walked through Central Park carrying coffee while tourists hurried past without recognizing either of them. Occasionally, they sat on benches overlooking the Hudson River and talked until the city lights reflected across the water like scattered stars. The strangest part was that neither of them ever seemed to run out of things to discuss. One evening, nearly 2 months after their first meeting, they sat beneath a string of lights outside a quiet neighborhood restaurant. The air was warm. Music drifted from a nearby street performer. For once, neither of them mentioned business. Can I ask you something? Grayson said. Evelyn smiled. You usually do. Why are you still working as a waitress? The question hung between them. Not insulting. Not judgmental. Simply honest. Evelyn stared at her coffee cup for several moments before answering. Most people eventually ask that. And most people do not like the answer. Try me. She laughed softly. That confidence is exactly why I enjoy talking to you. Grayson waited. Finally, Evelyn looked toward the city skyline, glowing in the distance. When I was 19, I received a scholarship. For mathematics? She nodded. Full tuition. Full housing. Everything. That does not surprise me. It surprised everyone else. A small smile touched her lips. Especially my mother. The warmth in her voice immediately caught his attention. She must have been proud. Evelyn nodded again. She was. Then her smile faded. A year later she became sick. Grayson remained silent. The city seemed quieter somehow. The treatments were expensive, Evelyn continued. Insurance covered some of it. Not enough. She looked down at her hands. So I left school. You dropped out. I postponed it at first. Her smile carried a trace of sadness. Then one semester became two. Two became three. Eventually it stopped being temporary. Grayson felt something tighten in his chest. You never went back? Evelyn shook her head. By the time I could have, she needed me more than the degree did. For several seconds, neither spoke. Cars passed in the distance. Laughter drifted from a nearby patio. Life continued around them. And your mother? Grayson asked quietly. Evelyn looked toward the sky. She passed away 3 years ago. The words were gentle, simple, yet they carried the weight of an entire chapter of her life. Grayson suddenly understood something he had missed from the beginning. He had spent months searching for the secret behind Evelyn's intelligence. But intelligence was never the secret. Character was. Many people could solve equations. Very few would sacrifice their future for someone they loved. I am sorry, he said. Thank you. Do you regret it? Evelyn considered the question carefully. Leaving school? Yes. She thought for a long moment. Sometimes. Then she smiled. But never taking care of her. Grayson looked away briefly. The answer hit harder than he expected. Throughout his career, he had measured success in numbers. Revenue, growth, market value, profit. Yet sitting across from Evelyn, those achievements suddenly felt smaller than they once had. You know, he said quietly, most people would call that a sacrifice. Evelyn shook her head. Not if you would make the same choice again. A warm breeze moved through the trees overhead. Somewhere nearby, the street musician began playing a slower melody. For a moment, neither spoke. They simply sat together beneath the lights, comfortable in the silence. Then Evelyn smiled. Your turn. Grayson laughed softly. My turn. Everyone tells me their story eventually. That sounds dangerous. It is. He looked at her and realized something surprising. He wanted to tell her. Not because she was curious. Because he trusted her. And that realization frightened him slightly. For the first time in years, Grayson Whitmore was no longer interested in who Evelyn Harper had been. He was interested in who she was. And somehow, that mattered infinitely more. 1 year later, Manhattan glittered beneath a clear autumn sky as guests arrived at the annual Whitmore Foundation Gala. Black cars lined the street outside the historic ballroom. Crystal chandeliers illuminated hundreds of guests. Business leaders mingled with educators, philanthropists, and scholarship recipients from across the country. It was the most anticipated charity event of the year, and yet Grayson Whitmore seemed less interested in the guest list than in a single person standing near the back of the room. Evelyn Harper wore a simple navy dress that reflected the elegance she had always carried naturally. She never enjoyed being the center of attention. Tonight, however, that was about to change. During the past year, many things had transformed. Evelyn no longer worked double shifts at the restaurant. She had returned to her studies part-time while continuing her volunteer work with students in Brooklyn. Grayson had expanded several educational initiatives after witnessing firsthand how many talented young people simply needed someone to believe in them. Their friendship had grown steadily through countless conversations, shared dinners, walks through the city, and quiet moments neither of them had expected to become so important. Yet despite everything they had shared, one conversation still remained unfinished. As the evening progressed, Grayson stepped onto the stage. The ballroom gradually fell silent. He thanked donors, highlighted community programs, and spoke about the importance of opportunity. Then his tone changed. A year ago, he said, I made a mistake. Soft laughter moved through the audience. That alone is not unusual. I have made many mistakes. More laughter followed. Even Evelyn smiled. Grayson reached into his jacket pocket and removed something folded carefully inside a protective sleeve. A napkin. Several guests looked confused. Evelyn immediately recognized it. Her eyes widened. This napkin contains the most valuable mistake of my life, Grayson continued. 1 year ago, I wrote a calculation on it during a business dinner. I was confident, surrounded by experts, certain I was right. The room listened closely. Then someone quietly informed me that I was wrong. More laughter spread through the audience. Not by a little either. Grayson smiled. By roughly $32 million. The ballroom erupted with amusement. He allowed the laughter to settle before continuing. At the time, I thought I was meeting a waitress who happened to be good with numbers. What I actually met was one of the most intelligent, generous, courageous people I have ever known. Across the room, Evelyn lowered her eyes. The attention made her uncomfortable. Grayson looked directly at her. She taught children without asking for recognition. She sacrificed her dreams to care for someone she loved. She reminded Billionaire that wisdom and kindness are not measured by titles, income, or job descriptions. The room grew quiet once again. Tonight, it is my honor to announce the Evelyn Harper Scholarship Program, which will provide opportunities to talented students whose circumstances might otherwise prevent them from pursuing their education. Applause thundered throughout the ballroom. Several guests rose to their feet. Evelyn covered her mouth in shock. Tears filled her eyes. Yet Grayson was not finished. As the applause faded, he stepped down from the stage and walked toward her. Hundreds of guests watched. The room seemed to hold its breath. When he reached her, he smiled softly. "You corrected my math." Gentle laughter moved through the audience. "Then you corrected quite a few other things too." Evelyn laughed through her tears. "You are making this very difficult." "I know. You planned this." "Obviously." More laughter followed. Grayson took her hand. "For years, I believed the most important equations were the ones that built companies." His voice softened. "I was wrong about that too." The ballroom became completely silent. The most important equation of my life began the day a quiet woman carrying a coffee pot decided to tell me the truth. Tears shimmered in Evelyn's eyes. And every day since then has been better because she did. For a moment, neither spoke. They simply looked at one another. No numbers, no business, no audience. Just two people whose lives had changed in ways neither could have predicted. Evelyn squeezed his hand gently. "You know," she whispered, "for someone who claims to love math, you were very difficult to calculate." Grayson laughed. "And yet somehow you solved me anyway." The audience laughed softly as well. Then, surrounded by applause, warm lights, and the people whose lives they had both helped change, Grayson and Evelyn embraced. Not because of wealth, not because of success, but because sometimes the most extraordinary outcomes begin with a simple correction, a quiet act of honesty, and a person willing to see value where everyone else overlooked it. And as the applause echoed through the ballroom, both of them finally understood that the greatest things in life are never found on a balance sheet. They are found in the people who change the way we see the world. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share this video, and let us know where you are watching from, and subscribe to When He Chose Her channel. Your support helps us continue creating powerful stories about kindness, dignity, unexpected connections, and life-changing moments. Share this video with someone who believes that true value is often hidden beneath the surface. Subscribe and join our growing community for more emotional, inspiring stories every week.